Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't pause, and she didn't soften her words. She looked directly at Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and said what many had been avoiding. The administration isn't just delaying the release of the Epstein files. It's panicking. That single word carried more weight than anything said over the last 8 weeks. And once you understand why she said it, everything suddenly makes sense. The stonewalling, the shifting explanations, the missing documents. The carefully staged photo ops that turned into excuses, the denials that turned into counterattacks, and the counterattacks that quickly collapsed into contradictions. Crockett began by thanking the chair and acknowledging the hearing, then launched directly into a broader warning. Since January, she said, Donald Trump has used the full power of the federal government against Americans in cities across the country. In her view, life under this administration has come with heightened risks, increased chances of militarized operations in people's homes, greater exposure to detention by unaccountable actors posing as enforcers, and a growing threat of injury caused by reckless and unlawful behavior from federal agents operating without restraint. She warned that even American citizens now face the risk of being deported, and that simply criticizing the president or his allies can place individuals in the government's crosshairs. She then turned her focus to Congress itself. Crockett accused congressional Republicans of abandoning their Article I responsibilities and trading their duty to constituents for loyalty to the president. By doing so, she argued, they allowed federal agencies to be transformed into tools of authoritarian power. As a result, she said, the president has been able to ignore federal law, defy court orders, and carry out what she described as the largest pay-for-play operation in U.S. history. In her words, the White House. What remains of it has effectively been put up for sale. Crockett pointed out that federal courts have repeatedly labeled this presidency as lawless. She cited rulings from Republican-appointed judges who rejected the administration's actions in blunt terms. In one case, a judge wrote that the court could not imagine how the public interest could be served by allowing federal officials to openly disregard the very laws they swore to uphold. In another case, a judge warned that allowing constitutional rights to depend on the goodwill of the executive branch would represent a serious failure of the judiciary's duty and run directly against the public interest. Yet another ruling captured the pattern clearly, stating that courts were once again being forced to confront an executive branch attempting to bypass the rule of law in pursuit of its own objectives. She didn't stop there. Crockett accused Judiciary Committee Republicans of being fully complicit in this behavior. And then, with pointed irony, she addressed their repeated claims about restoring law and order. If they truly cared about accountability, she said, there were obvious places to begin. She referenced a widely known image of the president standing beside his longtime associate, Jeffrey Epstein. As she reminded the committee, Epstein is one of the most notorious sexual predators in American history. Yet for 8 weeks, Republicans on the committee, she argued, had chosen to shield powerful figures. Instead of pursuing justice for Epstein's victims, that's when she returned to her central claim: the administration is panicking. First, they campaigned on promises to release the Epstein files. Then Attorney General Pam Bondi and her team staged a photo op with binders of documents. Bondi publicly declared that the Epstein list was sitting on her desk. The message was clear: something big was coming. But instead of transparency, what followed was confusion, delay, and retreat. And according to Crockett, that sudden shift is the clearest sign of fear. Yet then, almost overnight, the story changed again. Suddenly, the Epstein list supposedly didn't exist. Then the files themselves were dismissed as a Democratic fabrication. Now the president claims to support releasing the records, even as he actively ignores a congressional subpoena demanding their disclosure. The messaging keeps shifting, and at this point it's unraveling in public. According to Crockett, the president is spiraling because he cannot explain his decades-long relationship with one of the most infamous sexual predators in American history. It's already known that his name appears in the Epstein files. What the administration is working desperately to hide is the context what his involvement was, if any, in Epstein's crimes. She then turned attention to Ghislaine Maxwell, the woman convicted of helping Jeffrey Epstein traffic and abuse hundreds, if not thousands, of women and girls. Crockett pointed out that despite the severity of Maxwell's crimes, the president has given signals that she may receive special consideration. He has refused to rule out a pardon or a commutation of her sentence. Crockett made it clear why this matters. Granting clemency to someone convicted of sex trafficking would not represent justice or a return to law and order. It would represent the opposite. Next, Crockett shifted focus to Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. She accused Noem of spending time producing political-style promotional videos, while also steering millions of taxpayer dollars into private hands. According to Crockett, Noem directed large sums of government money to a firm called the Strategy Group, a company that played a key role in her successful campaign for governor of South Dakota. The connections don't stop there. Corey Lewandowski, a senior policy advisor, has ties to the firm, and the company's CEO is married to Noem's chief spokesperson. Crockett described this web of relationships as a textbook example of corruption public funds being redirected into the pockets of political allies. She then introduced another figure, so-called border czar Tom Homan. Crockett cited recorded evidence showing Homan accepting $50,000 in cash bribes, allegedly stuffed into a brown paper bag by an undercover FBI agent. According to the accusation, the money was exchanged for favorable treatment in awarding federal contracts to associates. Despite the seriousness of these allegations, Crockett said the Department of Justice shut down the investigation, and congressional Republicans remained silent. The final individual she highlighted was Ed Martin, whom she described as an insurrectionist and extremist sympathizer. Crockett explained that Martin appears to be operating in multiple powerful roles at once: Associate Deputy Attorney General, Pardon Attorney, head of a so-called weaponization task force, and Special Counsel for mortgage fraud. In practical terms, she argued, this makes him a political enforcer for the president, tasked with launching legal actions against perceived opponents rather than pursuing justice. Crockett summed it up bluntly. This is what organized corruption looks like. Laws are broken, taxpayer money is siphoned away, investigations are obstructed or shut down, and then the machinery of government is used to punish those who speak out. Meanwhile, she said, Republicans continue to enable this behavior, while turning their backs on real victims of violent crime. She concluded by pointing to policy decisions that reveal misplaced priorities. During recent appropriations negotiations, Republicans proposed cutting thousands of FBI positions and reducing the agency's budget by more than $1 billion. They also moved to slash funding for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, grants for juvenile justice initiatives, hate crime prevention, and community violence intervention programs were targeted for elimination. According to Crockett, while corruption is protected at the top, the resources meant to protect everyday Americans are being stripped away. They are, quite literally, defunding the police. No matter what talking points are used in today's hearing, congressional Republicans have already shown through their actions that they are not investing in keeping American communities safe from violent crime. And with that, Crockett yielded back. But the impact of what she said didn't end there. In fact, everything suddenly clicked the moment she connected the Epstein files to the powerful system fighting to keep them hidden from the very start of January. Crockett voiced something many were afraid to say publicly. She argued that federal power was being turned against the very people it was supposed to protect. She described a country where ordinary Americans were increasingly at risk, caught up in militarized operations, confronted by masked groups acting like vigilantes, or harmed by agents operating beyond legal boundaries. She spoke about unexplained detentions, deportations carried out without logic, and even American citizens being targeted. She warned that criticizing those in power now comes with consequences. She reminded everyone in the room that oversight was breaking down because members of Congress had willingly surrendered their constitutional authority. Instead of checking executive power, They traded their responsibility for loyalty and silence. Crockett didn't soften her language. She said federal agencies were being reshaped into instruments of personal control. Courts weren't subtle about it either. Judges, some appointed by the same political movement defending the administration, described the behavior as lawless. Their rulings read like warnings, not technical disagreements. This wasn't normal. It wasn't legal. And it wasn't sustainable, but Crockett wasn't simply reviewing court opinions or legal theory. She was drawing connections Republicans hoped would never be made publicly. While they shouted about restoring law and order, she pointed to the most obvious place to begin. She referenced a photograph recognized around the world, the most powerful man in government seated comfortably beside Jeffrey Epstein, one of the most notorious sexual predators of modern times. Her message was unmistakable. While survivors waited for answers, 8 straight weeks passed with committee members choosing protection over accountability. That's when the panic set in. First came the campaign promises to release the Epstein files. It became a slogan, a selling point, a reassurance to voters. Then Attorney General Pam Bondi staged a photo opportunity with stacks of documents and declared that the Epstein list was sitting on her desk. That single phrase spread everywhere. People believed transparency was imminent. They believed the truth was finally about to surface. Then everything changed. Suddenly, the list supposedly didn't exist. Then the files themselves were labeled a political hoax. In yet another reversal, the administration claimed it supported full disclosure, while at the same time refusing to comply with a lawful subpoena demanding the release of those very documents. The contradictions piled up so quickly that the scramble behind the scenes became obvious, and Crockett made clear what they were really afraid of. It isn't just the existence of the files, it's the context, the timelines, the overlapping relationships, the repeated interactions, the favors exchanged, the shared social circles, the moments that may look harmless when isolated but tell a very different story when placed side by side, instead of scattered across decades. Online speculation, leaked reports, and endless theories have filled the gaps for years. But what the administration fears most is no longer rumor, it's comparison. Once documents are public, patterns emerge. Connections become visible, and narratives that once relied on fragmentation collapse under a single, unified timeline. Archived interviews, old photographs, and past public statements continue to circulate. None of it is conclusive on its own, but all of it feeds growing questions. And the longer the Epstein files remain hidden, the more people begin to wonder what specific detail the administration is afraid someone might connect. Crockett emphasized what many already understand: certain names are confirmed to appear in the records. That fact alone isn't shocking. What matters more is what still hasn't been seen. According to her, the real instability comes from the missing pieces. That's why delaying disclosure didn't reduce suspicion. It intensified it. The constant reversals and rushed explanations weren't signs of confidence. They were signs of fear. And the moment she said that out loud, the energy in the room changed. But Crockett wasn't finished. She expanded her focus to what she described as a much broader pattern of corruption running through the government. She brought up Ghislaine Maxwell, a woman courts have found responsible for helping traffic countless young women and girls. While Maxwell is serving her prison sentence, reports began to surface that she was receiving unusual attention from people in positions of power. Crockett noted that the administration refused to rule out a pardon or a reduction of her sentence. That statement alone was enough to stop the room cold. A pardon or commutation for someone involved in crimes of that magnitude needs no further explanation. It speaks for itself. From there, Crockett followed the money, a path most politicians prefer to avoid. She highlighted the actions of the Secretary of Homeland Security, who had been busy producing polished promotional videos while millions of taxpayer dollars were being directed to a private company with deep personal ties to her inner circle. Advisors, campaign operatives, spouses, and close associates all appeared connected. Crockett described it as corruption happening in plain sight. No hidden shell companies. No offshore accounts. Just federal contracts openly enriching insiders. She then moved to another figure publicly labeled a border czar. According to evidence she cited, he was recorded accepting $50,000 in cash stuffed into a brown paper bag from an undercover FBI agent. The allegation was straightforward: federal contracts exchanged for bribes. But instead of a full investigation, the case was shut down entirely. Not delayed. Not paused. Ended. Crockett made sure to point out the silence that followed from lawmakers who frequently claimed to champion integrity and accountability. Still, she wasn't done. Crockett turned to an extremist figure who had somehow been placed into multiple, high-ranking roles inside the Department of Justice. There was no traditional vetting, no confirmation process, and a public history tied to violent rhetoric. She described him as a loyal political enforcer, someone deployed to initiate legal action against perceived enemies rather than to pursue actual criminals. Crockett called this what she believed it was: organized criminal behavior. Laws broken. Taxpayer money misused. Investigations shut down. And then the full weight of government turned against anyone who spoke up. While this network of power solidified, Crockett said, real victims of violent crime were being abandoned. Cities experiencing crisis-level spikes in homicides weren't receiving increased support, they were seeing cuts. Programs designed to prevent community violence faced elimination. The FBI was targeted with proposals for massive staffing reductions. The ATF faced budget slashes. Juvenile justice grants were put on the chopping block. Hate crime prevention programs were singled out for cuts. Her message was clear. While corruption was protected at the top, the resources meant to keep communities safe were being systematically stripped away. The same people loudly chanting "Back the blue" in front of cameras were quietly stripping funding from law enforcement where it actually mattered. That contrast is exactly why Crockett's warning was so straightforward. Don't focus on what they say. Pay attention to what they cut. Because when you follow the decisions on paper instead of the slogans on television, the truth becomes harder to ignore. And everything circles back to one central issue: the files. The growing pressure to release them. The rising public demand for answers. The shifting explanations. The nervous contradictions. The sudden reversals. Panic doesn't appear out of nowhere. Panic shows up when people realize that once information becomes public, excuses disappear. And when the excuses are gone, everything else starts to fall apart. The denials collapse. The contradictions unravel. The distractions stop working. The talking points lose their power. The media spin can't hold. All of it breaks down at once. That's why the past 8 weeks have felt so chaotic. Not because the documents are complicated, but because the consequences might be. Crockett described a government acting like it's terrified of revealing something that goes far beyond a list of names. Something that exposes how power was used, who benefited from it, who protected whom, and why the same people claiming to support transparency keep running from it. She closed her remarks with a message stronger than any headline. Accountability is not optional. It is not a campaign slogan. It is not something that gets delayed whenever powerful people feel uncomfortable. Accountability means survivors deserve justice. It means the public deserves the truth. It means systems built on secrecy eventually collapse under pressure. Corruption doesn't survive in the dark because it's powerful. It survives because it's protected. And when that protection starts to crack, panic follows, because Crockett's message wasn't just about Epstein. It wasn't only about corruption. It wasn't limited to 8 weeks of chaos. It was about what happens when a government is forced to face the truth it has spent years avoiding. She exposed the fear behind the delays, the desperation behind the messaging, and the real reason transparency has become the one thing those in power hope never arrives. And here's the part that matters most. Transparency doesn't just reveal what happened. It reveals who enabled it, who defended it, who ignored victims, who misled the public, who used their authority to protect people who never deserved protection. That is what the administration fears more than anything else. So where does this go from here? That depends on whether people keep watching moments like this and refuse to look away. Public pressure is the only force that ever cracked systems built on silence. And right now, every share, every voice, every demand for answers pushes this story one step closer to the truth finally coming into the open, if you want real accountability. If you want the files released without excuses, if you want justice for survivors. If you want the corruption Crockett exposed to be confronted instead of buried, make sure you're subscribed. Turn on notifications. Stay locked in. Because the moment transparency arrives, everything changes, and you won't want to miss what comes next.